Hello guys, and welcome to another episode of my lecture. This is Olayeni Diekolola Daniels, popularly known as Dieko Spectre, and this is another episode of Dieko Talks Law. On today's episode of Dieko Talks Law, we'll be talking about how to identify equitable interest, particularly for equitable mortgage. As you can see, this is the part 1. When we are talking about equitable mortgage, this class will be divided into 2 classes, where we'll talk about the part 1 as in this class, where we'll talk about mortgage of an equitable interest and agreement to create a legal mortgage. In the second class, we'll be talking about deposit of title deeds. Do note that when you are creating an equitable mortgage can be created in 3 ways. And these 3 ways I've said already. The first way is by mortgage of an equitable interest. The second way is by agreement to create legal mortgage, while the third way is deposit of title deeds. The first 2 ways we are going to discuss in this particular class, and the last one, which is deposit of title deed, we will discuss it in the part 2 of this class. But before we go into discussing the first 2 ways as for the part 1 in this class, if this is your first time of coming to my channel, please make sure that you click the subscribe button as well as the notification bell, so that anytime I release a video of this nature which is going to be of interest to you, you'll be one of the first set of people to watch that particular video. Also, do not forget to follow me on LinkedIn at Diekolola Daniels and on Instagram at Dieko_Daniels. I would also like to give shout out to 2 people who made this particular lecture possible. The first person, which is Komolafe Praise, for helping to make sure that the lecture notes for this lecture is made available. And then the second person is Odunwole Emmanuel, for making sure that the graphics in relation to this lecture is made available. Now, to the class for today, do not forget that what we are talking about is equitable mortgage. In our last class, we discussed what? We discussed mortgagor's equity of redemption, or mortgagor's right of redemption. That's what we discussed in the last class. In the class before then, we discussed restrictive covenants. In the class before then, we discussed purchase of land. In each of these classes, we were trying to highlight the event where we are going to have what? Equitable interest. And from purchase of land down to restrictive covenant down to the mortgagor's right of redemption, I've been able to show you how and why each one of those rights are equitable interest. Now, in relation to this particular class, we are talking about equitable mortgage. Now, an equitable mortgage is also a what? An equitable interest. Now, the question is, how then do you create an equitable mortgage? The first thing that we are talking about is mortgage of what? Of an equitable interest. Now, when we are talking about mortgage of an equitable interest, if a mortgagor has no legal interest but only has an interest which is equitable, any mortgage effect of that interest must necessarily be equitable. Now, do you see that? Now, do not forget that when I was teaching you in the last class, I was talking about what a mortgage is, and I told you that when you need money and then you go to bank and then you tell the bank or whoever it is that you are borrowing the money from that you are going to pay back in the next 2 years and all that, that's what a mortgage. If you use your property as a form of what? Collateral. That's what I said in the last class. Yeah. Now, in that last class, we're talking about what? A legal mortgage. Why is it a legal mortgage? Because at the end of the day, what do you have when you are not able to pay the money? You have what? Mortgagor's right of redemption. I mean, that's what we're talking about. That's like the scenario that I painted in the last class. Now, in this class, we are saying, okay, what if what you have on that land is not a legal interest? What if what you have on the land is what? Is an equitable interest? When you have an equitable interest, can you mortgage an equitable interest? That's the question. And the answer is yes, with what we are saying right now. Even if you have only an equitable interest on a land and you don't have a legal interest on a land, you can still mortgage that equitable interest, but what you have cannot be a legal mortgage but an equitable mortgage. So, for example, a beneficiary under the trust of land has merely equitable interest and can create an equitable mortgage on the land. Now, a beneficiary who has an equitable interest on a particular land, can go to the bank and collect money, but because what he has on the land, the interest he has on the land is what is equitable. Even if he wants to create a mortgage, he cannot create a legal mortgage. He has to create what? An equitable mortgage. Another example, if A creates a legal mortgage of his land by conveying his fee simple to B, he has parted with the legal estate and so cannot create any further legal mortgage of the mortgages of the property. He may thus create number of successive mortgages of that interest with equitable nature. Now, I'm very sure you're already asking, what's going on here? What's going on here? I'm becoming a little bit confused. Okay, what we are saying is this. Yes, we have A. What did A do? A has a land, and then A said, I need money, and then he went to collect 50 million naira from a bank and used that house. He had legal interest on the house. He used that house to create a legal mortgage. Because the mortgage is such that it is legal in nature, his own legal right in the property has therefore passed with that mortgage to the person who created the mortgage. Do you understand that? A is no longer with the legal interest. The person with the legal interest of that land is now who? X. Let's say Bank X was the one who gave him the money. Are you listening? However, A has equitable interest, regardless of the fact that there has been legal interest given to the bank. A still has what? Equitable interest. Now, because of A's equitable interest, A can still go to Bank B, Bank C, Bank D to collect equitable mortgage and still collect money from each of those banks. Are you listening to me? What I'm trying to let you understand is A can collect up to 5 mortgages from different banks. 5 different mortgages. But the only thing is that one mortgage is going to be legal. One mortgage will be legal, while the others will be equitable. It might not be the first one that is legal, but one mortgage can be legal. For you to have a legal mortgage, you must have followed the requirement as stated by law in relation to the creation of a legal mortgage. However, for you to have an equitable mortgage, I have told you that number one way of having an equitable mortgage is to what? Is to mortgage an equitable interest. So which means that if you have already mortgaged your legal interest, any other successive mortgages you want to make would have to be equitable, because you cannot have 2 mortgages of legal interest. You can only have 1 legal interest, then you can have thousands of equitable interest that has been mortgaged or that could be mortgaged. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when you are talking about legal mortgage can be created with the observance of the law. When you follow the procedure of the law, you can create legal mortgage to a property. But when a legal mortgage has been created, any other mortgage that will be created cannot be legal in nature anymore. It has to be what? It has to be equitable. But if the right that you had on a land in itself was never legal, the right you had was merely equitable, then any mortgage you want to have on that land has to be equitable. So for example, if you go to buy a land, for example, from a vendor, but you are doing it under the customary tenure system, and then you obviously have to pay money. That's what the case of Ogubambi versus Abawaba has told us. You have to pay money and you must have been delivered into possession. So now in this case, you paid money, right? No problem. You were delivered into possession, right? No problem. And then you continue to stay on the land. But then you needed money for something very, very important. And then you decided to mortgage that land for the money that you needed. Now, you cannot have a legal mortgage on the land because your interest on that land was not legal in itself. If your interest on the land was not legal, you cannot have a legal mortgage on the land. Do you understand what I'm saying? So until you have a legal interest, can you mortgage a legal interest? So that is why the first way to create an equitable mortgage is to have the mortgage of an equitable interest. So I have given you 2 instances. The first instance is where you have a legal interest in itself, where you have mortgaged your property, legal mortgage. Any other mortgage on that property will be equitable. The second instance is where you don't have a legal interest, but you have an equitable interest. Any mortgage of that your equitable interest will be equitable mortgage. Do you understand that? And then we go next to the second way by which we can create an equitable mortgage. And that second way is agreement to create a legal mortgage. As in the case of agreement to lease, equity looks on that as done which ought to be done. And where there is an agreement to grant a legal mortgage which equity would decree specific performance, that agreement will have the same status of an equitable mortgage. If the mortgagee wishes to make use of his legal remedies, he may obtain a decree of specific performance which will convert him from an equitable to legal mortgage. So what are we saying in essence? What we are saying is, okay, we've talked about the first instance where we can have an equitable mortgage. What is that instance? Where you mortgage your equitable interest. Now that one has gone. Now we are talking about the second instance where you can have an equitable mortgage. And that is where you have an agreement to create a legal mortgage. Why? When I was teaching you the maximum of equity, I taught you that equity deems as done what ought to be done. Do you understand that? So where you make an agreement to create a legal mortgage on a property, equity sees that agreement as if that legal mortgage has in fact been made. Do not forget that what we are talking about here is merely an agreement. An agreement to create a legal mortgage. You know, I told you that when you want to create a legal mortgage, there are certain requirements that would be done. But in this instance, you just saw your friend and you said, my guy, I have one money that I want to collect, and maybe you have collected the money and then you have agreed, don't worry, on so day I will come and meet you and then we will create a legal mortgage. You can see that the agreement was to what? Was to create a legal mortgage. I want to create a legal mortgage. On so day I will come and meet you and we will create a legal mortgage. And because of that agreement, I advanced money from my side to his side on the hopes that I will use his property as a collateral. Now, I'm not just hoping that I will use his property as a collateral. No, I am hoping backed up with the agreement. Are you listening? Backed up with the agreement that we are creating a legal mortgage. So because equity sees as done what ought to be done. What ought to be done in this case? We ought to have a legal mortgage. Why do we ought to have a legal mortgage? Because there has been an agreement to create a legal mortgage. Based on that agreement, equity will make a pronouncement through an order of specific performance if I deem fit. Do not forget that an agreement to create a legal mortgage does not create a legal mortgage but create an equitable mortgage. And don't forget that equitable mortgages, just like other equitable interests, are limited to the extent of a bona fide purchaser for value, number one, and number two, to the extent that there is no other one first in time. So because I realized that I am at a disadvantage, in short, not even one, two disadvantages. If there had been any other equitable interest in time, anyone in time before me, that one will take priority. And not just that, if any other legal interest comes from anywhere, then that one too, if it doesn't have any notice of my equitable interest, will then extinguish my own equitable interest, and then his will prevail. So because I know that I'm in such a precarious position, I then said, you know what, now that I have an agreement, I want to go and enforce this agreement because this guy doesn't seem to want to enforce the agreement. Then I will go to court. Do you understand? He doesn't seem to want to honor the agreement to create a legal mortgage even when I've advanced money to him. Then I'll go to court, show my evidence in court. My lord, there was an agreement to create a legal mortgage. And in this case, this other person does not want to honor this agreement. Look at the latter part of my note. The latter part of my note says that if the mortgagee wishes to make use of legal remedies, he may obtain a decree of specific performance which will convert him from what? From an equitable to legal mortgage. Can you see that? So if the other party is not forthcoming, but I have a binding agreement to create a legal mortgage, I then will go to court and say, my lord, come and see you. I have an agreement. He's not honoring the agreement. My lord can issue a decree of specific performance, converting my equitable mortgage to what? To legal mortgage. Do you see that? So you can see that the first thing that we have learned, when we have a mortgage of an equitable interest, it gives you what? It gives you an equitable mortgage. When you mortgage an equitable interest, the substance of your mortgage is not legal but equitable. It gives you what? It gives you equitable interest. Then the second one, when you have an agreement to create a legal mortgage, not an agreement to create an equitable mortgage, an agreement to create a legal mortgage, where that legal mortgage has not been created but an agreement has been made and money has been advanced, the mortgagee, that is the person who advanced the money, can go to court to convert that equitable interest into a legal mortgage. Do you understand? The equitable interest will convert that equitable interest of an equitable mortgage into a legal mortgage by an order of specific performance. Do you understand that? So with that, we've taught the first two ways by which you can have an equitable mortgage. The first one is what? A mortgage of equitable interest. The second one is what? Agreement to create a legal mortgage. Now, the third one is what I will be discussing in my next class, where we talk about deposit of title deeds. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this lecture. Please make sure that you like, share, and subscribe, and also make sure that you follow me on LinkedIn at Dear Kolola Daniels and on Instagram at Dearko_Daniels. I will see you in the part 2 of this lecture, which is going to be my next class. Have a wonderful day.